This is Lisa from MobileTechReview, and this is the new 2022 M2 MacBook Air, and I am so excited. And no, I'm not an Apple shill. If you don't know my channel, I'll talk about that stuff. But why am I excited? A crazy, powerful little laptop with a redesign, finally. The Air design has been around for a long time, and it needed updating, right? The bezels needed to be smaller. I like that they've added MagSafe, not just because MagSafe is pretty handy, especially if you have klutzy pets and mischievous children, but it also frees up your Thunderbolt 4/USB-C ports, so you're not using one of them to charge, all that sort of thing. Performance? Check. Good looks? Check. We're going to look at it now. All right, so quick basics. You probably know this already, right? But no more wedge shape. We have the new modern, I don't know, I call it the lozenge shape. It's like the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro design, but shrunk down, and it's even lighter than the previous generation of Air at 2.7 pounds, which is 1.24 kilograms, which is quite light. Maybe not as light as the Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Carbon 10th Gen, but that's 2.5 pounds, but close enough. We have a 1080p webcam, finally. I guess, you know, COVID life finally meant that manufacturers are upgrading the cameras. It's a bit better. It's more acceptable. It doesn't look craptastic anymore. We have quad stereo speakers on board, which is something that's kind of unusual for a laptop this small. As you no doubt know, you have 4 colors to choose from. We have what's called Starlight. I actually rather like it. It's a little bit of a gold to it, but it's a very complex color. It goes between a gold and a kind of silver, and it's nice. It doesn't show fingerprints. You have your usual space gray and silver options, and the new Midnight color, which we also saw as an Apple Watch color, which is a blue-black, and it is pretty, though for me it reminds me of some Asus ZenBooks that were in that kind of blue as well, and some Windows laptops, and it shows fingerprints a lot. For me, that would bother me. Having been a Razor Blade owner and just looked at it and gone, oh, every day when I picked it up. But I leave that up to you. It's nice to have choices. We also have a improved display. It's a little bit bigger, 13.6 inches versus 13.3 inches, a little bit more height. In part, that's because yes, it has a notch like the MacBook Pro 14 and 16-inch models. Now, I'm not a super fan of it. If you're watching a video, it disappears because most 16:9 aspect ratio videos show black bars top and bottom anyway. You might need a utility like Bartender if you have a lot of menu items showing up top so you can manage them more fully. Yeah, I'm not a fan given the fact that it doesn't give us something like Face ID. We do have Touch ID in the keyboard, but just to make room for a 1080p webcam, I don't know, something weird going on there. But anyway, it's a lovely display. And that little bit of a divide between the 13-inch MacBook Pro and the Air, where the Pro always got the better display, is suddenly gone. You've got enough resolution to add and compensate for the little notch up there. It's IPS and it is 500 nits, just like the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now, I thought I still wasn't gonna like it much because I'm using a 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Max processor inside. So I'm used to that mini LED experience. And this one is actually quite nice. You've got full P3 coverage, of course, full sRGB, and pretty good Adobe RGB coverage. For IPS, good contrast, Apple sources good quality panels, and I've actually enjoyed watching movies on it. And also, given the fact that it's quite color accurate out of the box, and you have that wide color gamut coverage, it's also great for photo editing, and for video editing too, but photo editors typically care a little bit more about accuracy there. And if you are doing things like consuming media, well, the quad stereo speakers are surprisingly good for a laptop this thin and this light. I mean, it beats just about every Windows laptop on the planet, even the big gaming laptops, which is why, right? Apple invests a lot of energy in that. No, there's not as much bass and fullness as there is on the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, but something's got to give because this one's a lot less money and a lot smaller. Money, let's talk about money. So, price went up $200 compared to the last generation Air. I don't know if it's supply chain issues, COVID, rampant inflation, or whatever it is, but starting price is now $1,200 instead of $1,000. That gets you Apple's usual stingy 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gigabyte SSD. Now there's brouhaha over brouhaha, and some YouTubers also like to make controversy, so you watch their videos about some of these things. But one thing is the fact that the motherboard has 2 sockets basically for the SSD modules. And if you get the 256, only one is filled, so you don't get any parallelism. So the 256 gig model's SSD is slower. We have the upsell version, shall we say, which has still 8 gigs of RAM, but a 512 gig SSD and a 10-core GPU versus 8-core. So we have parallelism, and we see the same performance that we did in the M1 era of 13-inch MacBook Pro and M1 Air there. So something to keep in mind. If you want more storage, you want a terabyte, you can do that. If you want more RAM, you can do that. You can go up to 24 gigs. So you can go 8, 16, or 24. Not 32, 24. Weird. Now, if this was a MacBook Pro model, I'd be saying, yes, you want 16 gigs, and those do start at 16 gigs. But given the fact that this is an Air, and this is the entry-level laptop for more casual users, you might be okay with 8 gigs. It almost kills me to say that, because I'm used to Windows World mostly, and you know, you definitely need 16 gigs in Windows World these days, but Mac OS handles things differently, and the M2 processor, just like the M1 also, is very efficient with doing virtual memory, paging out, and all that sort of thing. So I was surprised with our model here. I was doing things like multitasking, having 15 tabs open in Safari and less in Chrome. Chrome is more of a pig, I admit, but I just prefer Safari for privacy reasons and other things. I've got iMovie running, I have Photoshop running, and it's manageable. It's fine. I don't see any slowdowns and all that sort of thing. If you're a real power user, get 16 gigs of RAM or consider a Pro model. I'll talk more about that in the different Macs, which makes sense. Speaking of the fact that this is still the least expensive entry-level Mac laptop model that you can get, it's an interesting thing. When Steve Jobs pulled the first MacBook Air out of the manila envelope, it was actually a boutique, at the time, very expensive laptop. You were paying for the first of its kind. This is way before Ultrabooks and all that sort of thing, right? So it was like $1,800, which is probably about $2,500 or $2,600 in today's inflation-oriented times, right? So it became something different over the years for Apple. It became that more affordable. People loved it. So they did things like they gave it a pretty crappy TN panel for a while, and then lower-end IPS panels and other stuff like that. And sometimes it had a fan, sometimes it didn't have a fan for cooling, all that sort of thing. But they've managed to get this down to still be affordable and to be pretty premium. So that's the thing that I like. It feels a little boutique, even though the price isn't boutique, certainly not by Apple standards, even by Windows standards. You know, something that's $1,200 in Windows World doesn't get you the world's fanciest laptop anymore either, does it? So, you know, I mentioned fan, no fan. So this generation has no fan. So this is one of the few areas where the 13-inch MacBook Pro, which did not get a redesign, and I don't particularly recommend because of that, has a little bit of an advantage. 5% performance, sometimes 10%, but most of the time about 5%, because you have more thermal headroom. There's a fan cooling things down. With this one, you do have a large heat sink that spans the underside in the interior of the laptop, and performance is fine on this. I mean, yeah, if you're doing something really tough. In fact, Cinebench R23 is a benchmark that's harder than most things that you'll actually do in real life. I saw the CPU cores going up to 107, 108 degrees centigrade, and then of course it'll throttle back some. But the throttling isn't that bad. And if you're used to the world of Intel, be it on a Mac or in Windows, those things throttle all the time, and that's part of the power management of the system. They can get hot, and then it throttles back. So for a machine that's meant to be the entry-level, everyday computer for people doing office, social media, streaming, some photo editing, occasional video editing, it's absolutely fine. But for those of you who are spending all of your time in Final Cut Pro, if you're doing scientific analysis with scientific software, if you're doing Blender and all that stuff, you belong in a MacBook Pro 14 or 16 inch anyway. But not the 13 inch. It just doesn't bring much to the table. I mean, I'm sorry, 5% performance improvement most of the cases, and about 4 watt-hours more battery capacity. Get something with a more modern design like the Air. So while some YouTube channels have made a big deal about the M2 throttles, oh, as if the world of laptops aren't all about throttling, it's not that big a deal, folks. And the surface temperatures on this, when you're really pushing it hard, like making Cinebench benchmark repeat runs like we do, even using iMovie really doesn't get it that hot, you know, and using Lightroom and Photoshop simultaneously doesn't. But the hottest I could get, it was just a little bit above human body temperature, which means to us it would feel warm, not burning hot. For those of you who are coming from like a 2015 MacBook Pro, you're just going to laugh. This is going to be so cool to the touch, and obviously always silent because, well, no fan. Also for your Pro users, one thing to keep in mind that the M2 MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro with an M2 or M1 CPU for both of these, they only support one external monitor. If you need multiple external monitors, you need a 14 or 16-inch MacBook Pro. So there's that. So that leaves one other point of comparison, and that would be the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. And put that up with the Magic Keyboard, and that thing weighs 3.5 pounds. It's significantly heavier. It's noticeably heavier. That's one thing I think a lot of us have been disappointed at. We thought, oh, we can use this as our laptop replacement. You get a touchscreen, you get pencil support, yay, that. And then it's like, it's heavy. I know 3.5 pounds shouldn't seem that heavy, but it's pretty dense for the size of it. So there's that. But for those of you who value a touchscreen and the Apple Pencil experience more than having a desktop operating system because you're not tied to the desktop versions of applications, well, you could consider it. It's certainly not going to be any cheaper to go with an iPad Pro 12.9 and a Magic Keyboard in most cases, but it's there. I do wish Apple would just kind of merge the features that we could have a touchscreen Mac at some point with pencil support maybe too. And obviously there's the world of Windows too. So I mentioned that Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Carbon, that 2.5 pounder, even a little bit lighter. That one has its charm too because, well, for those of you who need Windows programs, obviously now that with the M architecture here where we can't run native Windows anymore, you can only run ARM Windows, it's a limitation for those of you who do need Windows. Well, but that's there for you, and it brings some, shall we say, legacy ports. It's nice to have a USB-A port, isn't it? It's rather handy. And then there's the Dell XPS 13, which is a lovely machine and super compact and doesn't have a notch up top and has those very slim bezels and high resolution display options. That's certainly viable too. Now, if you want to talk about throttling, heat, and then some fan noise, you'll hear that with the Dell XPS 13 because it is so miniaturized. That's the price you pay, which makes the MacBook Air seem a bit like a miracle in that it doesn't get burning hot and it doesn't throttle that severely, and you can do things like edit 4K videos on it if you want. Nice. Now for the charger, this is kind of weird. If you get the base model, you get a 30-watt old-fashioned charger, and if you spring for the upscale model, that's $1,500, which is the one that we bought, then you get the nifty new dual USB charger. There's two USB-C ports on it, MagSafe. You get a 6-foot cable that color matches your laptop, and that's 35 watts. But if you wish, for no charge, you can swap in the 67-watt USB-C charger from Apple too, which does charge about twice as fast. So you can charge it 50% in a half an hour instead of in an hour, but then you give up MagSafe. Anyway, you have options. And yes, obviously you can charge it via USB-C or plug it into a USB-C monitor and that will charge it, or dock. Battery life is about the same as the M1 MacBook Air, which is to say excellent, if not class leading. You may find some Windows laptops that can keep up, which is a great thing. It's nice to see everybody upping the game there, but I would estimate that you could probably do 10 hours on a charge with light to moderate use. If you're doing something like iMovie editing, you know, then obviously shorter, but it's very good stuff. That combined with the thermals, combined with the high resolution display, combined with the performance here, I mean, this is like kind of the mic drop of Ultrabooks, you know, you just walk in the room, you say, boom, mine's not running too hot to touch. Mine can do all this. Mine has this nice display. Mine can run forever on a battery charge. Wow. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.